Right, welcome back for chapter 12 of the book of Exodus. This one's a long one. We got a lot to talk about on this one, so buckle in. This is going to be a lot of fun stuff we get to talk about on this one. So now, if you remember, we just talked about, of course, the last plague, the last problem, the firstborn is going to happen. So in this one, we're getting a lot of instructions given to Moses in this revelation, basically. So that's partly why there's a lot to talk about. A lot of good stuff we get to learn, though, some fun things. So the Lord institutes the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Lambs without blemish are slain. Israel is saved by their blood. The firstborn of all Egyptians are slain. Israel is thrust out of Egypt after 430 years. No bones of the paschal lambs are to be broken. So some very specific rules that the Lord sets out for Israel to follow with this one, basically. So remember, this last plague is that the firstborn of all the families are going to die. So that's what we're facing, okay? But there's a way for, this is going to hit Israel as well, if they follow the commandments. If they don't follow these commandments, they'll get hit by this, basically. So a couple good things here. Verse 1, and the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year unto you. So the Lord is putting a mark in the calendar going, this is going to be the beginning. This is so significant to Israel and to your future, that I'm going to basically change your calendar, and this is now going to be the first month of your calendar. This is the beginning of months. Basically, we're going to change the calendar, and now this is January 1st, basically. In fact, a quote that we have here says, so significant was the event about to take place that the Lord commanded Israel to use this event as the beginning of their calendar. Thus, the sacred calendar of Israelite feasts and festivals begins with the month of Abib, later called Nisan, which corresponds to late March and early April. So this is right, we're recording this at the end of March. This is when we're bringing this up in the Come Follow Me stuff. So this is about the time of year that this happened, basically. So the so-called Jewish New Year, which may come either in September or October, began while the Jews were captive in Babylon. So the Lord said, this is going to be your January, but then it was changed in Babylon to be more of a September-October timeframe. So the calendar got changed again. But it's important for us to look at, this is when the Jewish calendar, according to the Lord, was supposed to start. So if somebody ever asks you about like Latter-day stuff, the Jewish calendar, and here's how I figured this out, are you following the one where the new year starts in October, September timeframe, or when they start with the month of Nisan, the beginning, which is more March and April timeframe? Because there could be some differences in how you look at that Jewish calendar. So you have to be careful. We can't rely all just on, I'm using this Jewish calendar to try to predict the last days and say how many years from this and this and this. There's been changes to that Jewish calendar. So we can't say, unless you've really lined this up properly, maybe we can't be 100% reliant on using this concept of the Jewish calendar to understand the timing of things in the last days. So just a little bit of a tidbit there. Okay, so now verse 4, and if the verse 3, speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, in the 10th day of this month, they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for an house. So every house needs to have a lamb. And if the household be too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next unto his house take it according to the number of souls. Every man according to his eating shall take your count for the lamb. So if you're a small family, you can join with another family to kind of form a bigger family to officiate this feast, this ordinance, if in a way. Verse 5, your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. So it is a firstborn lamb, just like what this plague is going to be. Ye shall take it out from the sheep or from the goats, and ye shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. So they on the 10th day, they organize, they they get ready, they find this lamb, they keep it away from everybody for 4 days. And the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. So at the end of the 14th day, you sacrifice that lamb, basically. And they shall take, this is verse 7, they shall take of the blood and strike it on the 2 side posts and on the upper doorpost of the houses wherein they shall eat it. So then you're going to take this blood and put it on the side post of your door and along that top post of the door, the header of the door as well. You're going to brush or sprinkle that blood on it, basically. They shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Eat not of it raw, nor sodden at all with water, meaning boiled. They have to roast it. They can't boil it, but roast with fire, his head with his legs, and with the protuberance thereof. So they're taking a lamb, they are putting it on a stick. They're killing it, spraying the blood. They're putting it on a stick or a way to roast it. They're going to roast it over fire. They're not quartering this lamb. They're not pulling the meat off and getting rid of everything else. They're not even taking the organs out of it. Usually when you kill an animal and go to eat it, the internal organs are like the stomach and the intestines and things. You want to clear that part of the body out because a lot of heat can stay inside there. You clear all those organs out, which can help let the heat escape from the meat. Because if you leave those in, you can get spoiled. Not to mention the contents of the stomach can be bad because there's bacteria in the stomach that can cause other problems and diseases and things if it spoils and goes bad. So you've got to, there's a procedure when you kill an animal to cut it up and take care of it. And they're saying with this one, you're not doing any of that. Basically, you're going to roast it over a fire, and then you're going to eat it that night. Everything intact. Everything intact. Okay, that's an important thing. So here's something that I have here as well. Sodden with water means boiled or stewed. The lamb was to be roasted, not cooked in water. The phrase, with the protuberance thereof, means that the entrails or internal organs were to be roasted with the animal. Kyle and Delitzsch translated verse 9 as follows: They shall eat the lamb in that night, and none of it underdone or raw or boiled, but roast with fire, even its head on, along with its thighs and entrails. They explained that the lamb was thus undivided or whole, so that neither head nor thighs were cut off, and not a bone was broken. And the viscera were roasted in the belly along with the entrails, the latter, of course, being first of all cleansed. It is very certain that the command to roast was not founded upon the hurry of the whole procedure, as a whole animal could be quite as quickly boiled as roasted, if not even more quickly, and the Israelites must have possessed the requisite cooking utensils. It was to be roasted in order that it might be placed upon the table undivided and essentially unchanged. Through the unity and integrity of the lamb given them to eat, the participants were to be joined into an undivided unity and fellowship with the Lord, who had provided them with the meal. So that was their commentary on this as well, some biblical scholars. So very different than what we'd normally have, but there's significance because, of course, we know now, we understand that the sacrifice of the lamb is a symbol of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Okay, so it wasn't quartered, wasn't taken apart, it was whole, unbroken, basically, and clean and undivided, all that. So it's really interesting. Lots of symbolism come out in this. Lots of symbolism. And ye shall let nothing of it remain until the morning, and that which remaineth of it until the morning ye shall burn with fire. So anything that doesn't get eaten is to be destroyed, basically. Thus ye shall eat it, with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, your staff in your hand, and ye shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. So this is the beginning of the Passover. Have you ever heard that? Oh, this is the Passover, the feast of the Passover. This is Passover time. This is what it's referring to. This is where it began, was this final plague of Egypt as the Israelites were trying to leave. So it's called the Lord's Passover because why? Verse 12, For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where ye are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you when I smite the land of Egypt. So this is the important thing, okay? This is something that we have to really think about and understand a little bit. The blood of the Lamb saves the people from destruction. So that's a great metaphor for understanding that the atonement of Jesus Christ saves us from the destruction of death and sin. Very, very important. Very, very important for us to understand. Okay, we talked about previously that whole metaphor of how Satan is oppressing us with sin and putting us in bondage to sin, just like Pharaoh is putting the Israelites into bondage to him, and that it's the death of the firstborn that allows them to escape. The death of Christ, the firstborn or only begotten Son of God, is what liberates us from sin and frees us to worship God more. So this is such a powerful opportunity for us to understand the importance of the atonement of Jesus Christ. Now, these are great, large concepts of the atonement of Jesus Christ that we get to learn in these lessons, which is wonderful because this is fitting in that whole grand scheme of the plan of salvation. So if we take what we learn from the apocalyptic writings in the Pearl of Great Price of Moses and Abraham about the creation and the fall of Adam and Eve and all that stuff, and then we put in here this idea of the atonement coming in to atone for all of our sins and our problems and to help us to be liberated, to live with God again, to be delivered out of sin. There's all kinds of great metaphors that can really help us understand these grand concepts of the plan of salvation as we go forward, which is really, really cool. Some really fun ideas that we get to look at. So this is what happens. Now, you got to look at it from the children of Israel case. The first couple plagues they experienced, then they stopped experiencing the plagues. The worst crazy plagues, they didn't get any of those. Egypt got those only. Israel was free. But now this plague can hit Israel if they are disobedient. So this one, there's some different significance with this one, okay? That's important because of it. It's not that you get just because you're an Israelite, you get off scot-free on this one. No, you need to be instructed and understand you can be hit with this one, but you don't have to if you're willing to follow the commandments, which is to go through this feast of Passover, basically. So that's all they had to do to be saved. And if they didn't, it's their own fault. They didn't keep these commandments. I'm sure there were Israelites that are like, this is dumb. We haven't been hit by the other ones. God's not going to hit us with this one. That just seems inconsequential to kill a lamb that way. It doesn't make any sense to do it that way. I'm not going to do it. And then they're going to wake up and their firstborn is going to be dead. So just following this, sometimes God's commandments don't necessarily logically match up, but there's significance and importance for us to understand. And if we keep his commandments, we can then learn and have access to his promises and power to help us. Okay, so now let's jump in. There's more to this feast. Basically, verse 14, this day shall be unto you for a memorial. So this is something we want you to remember and think about. And ye shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. Ye shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. So I have something here about that word forever. The feast of the Passover was fulfilled in that form in the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. By the way, this is Joseph Fielding Smith in his book, Answers to Gospel Questions, that's telling us this. The Passover law was given to Israel, which was to continue until Christ, and was to remind the children of Israel of the coming of Christ, who would become the sacrificial lamb. After he was crucified, the law was changed by the Savior himself. And from that time forth, the law of the sacrament was instituted. We now observe the law of the sacrament instead of the Passover, because the Passover was consummated in full by the death of Jesus Christ. It was a custom looking forward to the coming of Christ and his crucifixion, and the lamb symbolized his death. The word forever used in the Old Testament does not necessarily mean to the end of time, but to the end of a period. So something that President Smith teaches us there to understand this. When they say forever, it's not always meant literally it'll never change ever again, but it will be this way for a very, very long time, basically. I mean, if you think about it, it was this way for like another 1,200 years. So that's kind of forever. 1,200 years of doing it the same way, that's kind of forever, at least in our human concept of time. That's a long time. So realize that, and this is another good principle for us to realize, okay, the law that Moses put in place was to teach the people to remember and be prepared for this idea of the sacrifice of the Savior. When the Savior came and he did the sacrifice, the law changed. Didn't negate the law necessarily, but he changed it because it was fulfilled. Now we have something else. So instead of remembering and preparing for the sacrifice, we remember the sacrifice that he made for us, and that is the sacrament which he put in place during the Last Supper, basically with his apostles. And most likely their wives were there too for that one, according to apocryphal writings. So can God change his laws? Yeah. Can some laws be fulfilled and then another law put in place? Yeah. The gospel doesn't stay the same always. It can be adjusted or changed based upon things being fulfilled, things changing, and so forth. So that's important to look at. Very important concept for us to understand. Because if you think about it, what kind of scriptures did the New Testament people have? The Old Testament. And now they're looking at it going, Christ is now taking what we have in the Old Testament and changing it. That's the whole Sermon on the Mount. He took what was in the Old Testament and said, this is good, but let me give you more. That's important. We should always be looking for how can God give us more to help us improve our understanding of his gospel. Just because he said it once doesn't mean it doesn't change. Just means that over time, sometimes we need more revelation or more guidance. As we gain more spirituality, as we're better prepared, we can learn more truth. So building upon past histories of teachings of the gospel is great because it helps us to continue to move forward with new revelation to guide us even more. So Christ expounded and added to the scriptures of his time, which was the Old Testament. And that's what we call the New Testament. And so it did make sense that God would continue to do that moving forward into the future as well, with more prophets and other books and things that he could put together, which we could call Book of Mormon, as well as Doctrine and Covenants. Okay, so verse 15, 7 days shall ye eat unleavened bread. Even the first day ye shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eateth leavened bread or leavened bread from the first day until the seventh day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. So you'll be excommunicated if you eat leavened bread, basically. Now this is important. What is leavened bread? Okay, leaven or leavening, whatever you want to say it, that is yeast. When you make bread, you mix yeast into it, and that causes the yeast reacts with the sugars in the bread, and it causes the bread to rise. That's where you get that fluffy lightness of the bread. And as that happens, that helps your bread to cook better, basically. You get a little bit more fluffier bread. Unleavened bread tends to stay small. It doesn't expand with the gases inside of it. It stays more flat, doesn't grow. So you think of like a quesadilla type, it's a tortilla or something like that. It's unleavened bread, basically. Leavened bread is bread that yeast has been added to. Unleavened is bread that has not had yeast put into it. Now, this is interesting because yeast, in fact, let me read you this. This is some good information on this here. Leaven or yeast was seen anciently as a symbol of corruption because it so easily spoiled and turned moldy. Jesus, this is why bread goes bad, because partially it's because of all that yeast and things. Jesus used this imagery when he warned the disciples of the leaven of the Pharisees. That's Matthew 16:6, meaning their corrupt doctrine. In the law of Moses, no leaven could be offered with the trespass offering, suggesting that the offering must be without any corruption. For the Israelites, eating the unleavened bread symbolized that they were partaking of the bread which had no corruption or impurity, namely the bread of life, who is Jesus Christ. The careful purging of the household of all leaven was a beautiful symbol of putting away all uncleanness from the family. Paul drew on this imagery of the unleavened bread when he called upon the Corinthian saints to put away sin from their lives. So this idea isn't, they literally ate bread that had no yeast in it, so it didn't rise. It was a flat bread, basically. But the whole point of it isn't to say you have to eat flat bread. Flat bread's better than other bread. The point of it was the yeast was seen as a corruption to the flour. And so by getting rid of it, the symbol is you need to eliminate corruption from your life. You need to eliminate sin from your life. You need to be clean and improve yourself and be more committed to the gospel of Jesus Christ. So a good lesson for us to look at is what can we do in our lives to get rid of sin? We all have pet sins. We all have those little things we hold on to. I'm guilty of challenges myself, and not going to go into details on that. We all have our own problems. But the thing is what can you do today to say, I'm going to keep working on getting rid of these things? Sometimes you might have things you're like, oh, I can give up something easy. I could change the music I'm listening to, or stop smoking, or whatever it is. Sometimes there's things that you could say that are pretty simple for you to do. Okay. The thing that's important to realize in the book Miracle of Forgiveness by President Kimball, he talks about there's two types of sin. There's sins of commission, or things that you do that are wrong. Sins of omission are things that you don't do, and by not doing them is wrong. So think of both of those in your life. How can you cut the leaven in your life, or get rid of corruption? So sometimes you get rid of corruption by avoiding things like alcohol or tobacco or whatever, pornography, or being angry with people or things like that. But you can also help limit that corruption in your life by doing things like praying, like studying the gospel more, like attending church, like fulfilling your ordinance work, or things like that. So realize there's things that you can do to eliminate corruption and things that you can avoid that would cause corruption. So what do you need to change in your life? Do you feel any inspiration of doing that? You don't need to put that in the comments. What it is you're going to do. If you want to, you can, but you don't have to. But just think about that. What can you do now that will help you to lower the corruption in your life? How can you allow the Savior and his guidance more in your life? So that's really what this whole point is, basically. Okay, so verse 16, in the first day there shall be an holy convocation, and in the seventh day there shall be an holy convocation to you. So they're getting together. And no manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat, that only may be done of you. So in these convocations, this day, kind of like a Sabbath day, you're not working, you're not doing your normal routines, you are worshiping. You can cook your food, take care of yourself, because that's important. But outside of that, you don't need to, basically. Verse 17, ye shall observe the feast of unleavened bread. For in this selfsame day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall ye observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever. Now, this is important. When he's talking about armies are men. Okay, that's what he's talking about. Is an army is men. So that's gonna come up a little bit later on, in fact, in this chapter. Verse 18, in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at even, ye shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at even. 7 days shall there be no leaven found in your houses. For whosoever eateth that which is leavened, even that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he be a stranger or born in the land. Ye shall eat nothing leavened, and all your habitations shall ye eat unleavened bread. So this is part of the Passover feast. This is part of what this whole process is, that is in a way pretty closely followed still to this day by a lot of the Jewish nation. So when you see that on the calendars, the feast of the Passover or Passover on your calendars, These are the kind of things that the Jewish nation is doing, basically. Fascinating stuff. If you get to talk to somebody of the Jewish nation that follows these traditions, learn from them about this. There's some really fun things to see how this tradition has continued. I mean, literally, that tradition is over 3,000 years old. That's amazing that it is still happening. So verse 21, then Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said unto them, draw out and take you a lamb according to families and kill the Passover. And ye shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin and strike the lintel and the two side posts with the blood that is in the basin. None of you shall go out at the door of his house until the morning. For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians, and when he seeth the blood upon the lintel and on the two side posts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not suffer the destroyer to come in unto your houses to smite you. And you shall observe this thing for an ordinance to thee and to thy sons forever. So you're going to continue to do this. And so that's what he's telling them. Get some weeds. You're going to kind of make a paintbrush and you're going to put the blood on, and then you're going to observe these feasts and these rituals for this night, basically, to do this. It's kind of fun how Cecil B. DeMille represented this. If you remember, in fact, do you remember what he did? How he represented the destroying angel coming through? I'm kind of curious. If you do, put in the comments what he used to represent this destroying angel, and just to see how many of you remember Cecil B. DeMille's famous movie about the Ten Commandments. All right, so let's jump in here. Verse 25, it shall come to pass when ye be come to the land which the Lord will give you, according as he hath promised, that ye shall keep this service. So, Moses is telling him, this isn't just for while we're here in Egypt. When we go back to the land of Canaan, we are still going to keep this. This is a memorial. This is something we're going to do every year, the Feast of the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, basically. Verse 26, it shall come to pass when your children shall say unto you, what mean ye by this service? So Moses is telling them, when your kids come to you and say, Dad, why are we still doing this? We're not in Egypt anymore. Why do we do this? This is what you're going to tell them. That's verse 27. That ye shall say, it is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians, and delivered our houses. And the people bowed the head and worshipped. And the children of Israel went away and did as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so did they. So they've explained this, and they go, oh, okay, this is what we'll tell our kids. So this is going to be handed down from generation to generation. Like I said, it's still going today. So cool. So cool. Well worth learning more about. Get in a conversation with members of the Jewish community and learn more about this from them. They're really cool. Some fun stuff. Verse 29, and it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. So it wasn't just humans, but it was even the animals' firstborns were all killed, basically. Verse 30, Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house that there was not one dead. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night, and said, rise up and get you forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go serve the Lord as ye have said. Also take your flocks and your herds as ye have said, and be gone, and bless me also. So this is a big change, big change. Pharaoh has finally said, go, get all of your stuff, get out of here. It's more important that you leave than you stay. So Pharaoh has finally gotten to the point where he's not trying to negotiate a way to keep his power. He's finally done. You go. This is the end of it. This is the last straw, basically. Pharaoh's will has been broken. So verse 33, and the Egyptians were urgent upon the people, that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, we be all dead men. So you have to realize, basically, Israel is destroyed. Their crops are gone. Their animals are gone. They've, plagues and diseases and famines. Now the firstborn is gone. This has hit literally at home for the Egyptians. And it's become extremely real what is going on in their destruction. Now they're afraid that the rest of them are going to be wiped out because of this. So now they've lost all that motivation and to hold on to things and go, it's better if you leave than we go any further along this. We've hit that line. We've lost everything. We don't want to go any further down this trail. So you got to get out of here. It's more important that you leave than we get destroyed, basically. So the status quo, the changes, things have changed, tables have turned, and it's now motivation to leave. All right, so verse 34, and the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading troughs being bound up in their clothes upon their shoulders. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses. And they borrowed of the Egyptians jewels of silver, jewels of gold, and raiment. Remember, we're talking about that. They says, look, we're leaving, but you need to pay us, give us some compensation for what we've done to help you out. Okay, fine, we'll do this. You just leave. I'm sure at this point, all the Egyptians are like, whatever you want, you just take, get out of here. My life is more important. I don't want to die. You just leave. Verse 36, the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things as they required, and they spoiled the Egyptians. Basically meaning they left with, they take a bunch of wealth with them as well as they left. And I'm sure the Egyptians, it sounds like, were pretty willing to give that up just to say, get out. Get out. I don't want to die. Get out. Verse 37, and the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot that were men, beside children. Now remember, when they count an army, they're counting men. So that's that idea of that army, basically, is we're bringing these 600,000 men. An important thing to look at here is realize that that's 600,000 men. So these are men of at least 18 to 20 years old and up that are going out here. Most likely that means, of course, that's not counting women or children. So there's a good chance that they say, in fact, what they say, there's a figure here, let's see, this fact means that the total company could have easily been over 2 million people. The mixed multitude, let me read verse 38, and we'll go into the rest of this little excerpt here. And a mixed multitude went up also with them, and flocks and herds, and even every much cattle. So the mixed multitude of verse 38 seems to refer to people of other nationalities who attached themselves to the Israelites and accompanied them in the Exodus. These seem to be the same people mentioned in Deuteronomy 29, 10, 11, which we're going to get to in a future video, who did menial labor for the Israelites. They also later joined the Israelites in the rebellions against God. See Numbers 11:4. So there's more than just the children of Israel. There were people that were connected with the children of Israel, could be servants of the children of Israel or friends or others that came out with them as well and left. So a little over 2 million people, basically, most likely. Verse 39, they baked unleavened cakes of the dough, which they brought forth out of Egypt, for it was not leavened. Because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not tarry, neither had they prepared for themselves any victual. So they just had to, they didn't leaven their bread. They didn't have time to do any of that. So they just ate the unleavened bread and they left with it, basically. They cooked it so it was there to preserve. If you didn't leaven it, the dough would go bad faster. So cooking it at least gave it longer time to last before it all went bad. Verse 40, now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. Now this is interesting because there's some controversial ideas about this, that this happened, because as we look in verse 41, it came to pass at the end of 430 years, even the self same day it came to pass that all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. So there's a lot of discussion and conversation about this that talks about this idea of the 430 years, that there was some significance to this. In fact, this says here, the Samaritan text, one of the oldest manuscripts of the Old Testament, reads, now the sojourning of the children of Israel and of their fathers, which they sojourned in the land of Canaan, in the land of Egypt, was 430 years. Clark in his Bible commentary quotes that. Other equally significant texts do not support this addition, however, though. So here's something that's interesting. He says, when Abraham was shown the future bondage of Israel in vision, the Lord said, thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 430 years. Is Genesis 15:13. So Abraham was told how long it was going to be. They'll be afflicted for 430 years. Now, this passage suggests strongly that the captivity would be 400 years. 400 years is what Abraham is told. But one scholar wrote a summary of the evidence for both views. Was it 400 or 430, basically? Concluded the idea of the longer captivity is best supported. He said, some years ago it was fashionable to date the Exodus to the 15th century BC. 1 Kings 6:1 says it was 480 years from the Exodus to the 4th year of Solomon's reign. This points to the 15th century. Moreover, the discovery of the 14th century Amarna letters, letters from vassal princes in Canaan to Amenhotep IV, who's the famous Akhenaten, that's the name. That's King Tut's dad, Akhenaten, if I remember right, that we talked about a couple of chapters ago, speak of confusion in the land. The disturbance was occasioned by the relaxation of Egyptian rule coupled with marauding bands of brigands who are called Haparu. The Haparu were associated in some scholars' minds with the invading Hebrews. Furthermore, Professor John Garsting, the excavator at Jericho, said that city was destroyed in the late Bronze Age, a time which would fit with the other evidence. This city was, of course, the one which the Bible says was the first to be taken by the Hebrews in Canaan, as they marched around its walls and blew their trumpets, and the walls came tumbling down. So a number of factors converged to support what seemed to be a biblical dating for the Exodus. The suggestion was that the Pharaoh of the Exodus was either Tutmosis III, which he reigned 1490 to 1435 BC, or Amenhotep III, 1406 to 1370 BC. Remember, time is going down in BC, basically. Today, the picture has changed entirely. One by one, the factors which pointed to an early date for the Exodus have either been called into doubt or have been shown to have nothing to do with the question. At the same time, new evidence has come to light which points to a later date, the 13th century, perhaps early in the reign of Ramses II, which was 1290 to 1224. Exodus 1:11 tells us that the Hebrews' bondage had to do with rebuilding the royal treasure cities of Pithom and Ramses, or also called Tanis. The nature of this bondage, as described in Exodus 1:14, strongly suggests that being nomads close to the building sites, these people were pressed into labor gangs. They were forced to develop the fields which would support the populations of the cities, as well as make brick out of which the splendid new royal bastions were being constructed. Archaeologically, recovered history of these sites indicates that they went into decline when the Hyksos were driven from the land, but that they were rebuilt under Ramses II, or possibly his father Seti I, who reigned from 1309 to 1290 BC. There is also the statement in chapters 20 and 21 of Numbers that when the Hebrews sought to cross Edom and Moab, they were turned back and had to make their way along the border between these lands. Again, archaeological research can now tell us about the history of this Transjordanian area. It did not have a settled population until the 13th century. Before that time, there would have been no Edom and no Moab to refuse passage to the Hebrews. There also has come to light another written source of interest in dating the Exodus. This is an Egyptian inscription celebrating the victories of Pharaoh Merneptah in Canaan around the year 1220 BC. This speaks of Israel and is indeed the oldest written mention of Israel we know. Of course, this only shows the latest date one can give for the presence of Israel in Canaan. But the date of the inscription 1220 BC is taken by some to be significant in light of other evidence. A part of that evidence, in addition to what has been mentioned, is the violent destruction of a number of Canaanite cities in the 13th century. Was this the work of invading Hebrews? Clearly, the question of the date of the Exodus cannot be settled decisively, yet the weight of evidence is strong, and almost all scholars today agree upon Ramses II, or possibly his father, as the ruler whose heart was hardened against the Hebrews. This is out of the book Discovering the Biblical World. That was page 56. So some really interesting ideas. So if you look in Egyptian history, Ramses II, Seti I is probably when things happened. And after, if I remember right, Ramses II, we kind of see Egypt goes into a decline. They don't become their previous power that they were before. They kind of go into decline. It's not too long after that we get into the Greek pharaohs, the other people, the Ptolemies and others. They kind of come later down the road in the later kingdom and things. But we see this decline where Egypt is no longer much of an influence on the world power anymore, basically, is what ends up happening with them. So some really interesting ideas and concepts to help us try to put into context, what's going on at this time, basically. Okay, so now we have verse 42. It is a night to be much observed unto the Lord for bringing them out from the land of Egypt. This is that night of the Lord to be observed of all the children of Israel in their generations. So this is, again, talking about the remembering and making this a memorial. This is an annual event of the Passover. Verse 43, and the Lord said unto Moses and Aaron, this is the ordinance of the Passover. There shall be no stranger eat thereof. But every man's servant that is bought for money, when thou hast circumcised him, then shall he eat thereof. A foreigner and an hired servant shall not eat thereof. In one house shall it be eaten. Thou shalt not carry forth aught of the flesh abroad out of the house, neither shall you break a bone thereof. And all the congregation of Israel shall keep it. So they're saying that if you're not an Israelite, if you are a stranger, if you're not of those tribes, you're not allowed to observe the Passover, basically, and you can't take the meat out of the house when you cook it. You can't break any of the bones. You can't do any of those things. Verse 48, when a stranger shall sojourn with thee and will keep the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and he shall be as one that is born in the land, for no circumcised person shall eat thereof. So what he's really talking about basically is if you keep the ordinances to join the children of Israel, this is kind of that idea of adoption into the children of Israel, then you can keep the Passover. But if you don't, you're not allowed to be in those homes or deal with the Passover. You've got to leave. And today that's more of like keeping baptism kind of a thing, basically, those ordinances. Verse 49, one law shall be to him that is homeborn, and unto the stranger that sojourneth among you. Thus did all the children of Israel, as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron, so did they. And it came to pass the selfsame day that the Lord did bring the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their armies, by their groups, basically, because they would divide themselves out and say, okay, you're going to be captain of hundreds, and then there'd be captains of tens underneath that. They organized themselves to make sure everybody's taken care of as they move out from Egypt, basically. Not unlike what an army would back then anyways, honestly. So some really fun things we get to learn in this chapter. I hope you really enjoyed some of these observations and ideas. If you want, leave in the comments what you think about these things, because there's a lot that impacts our life still to this day with these traditions and concepts and ideas that we learn in this chapter. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next chapter.